Julius Caesar marched in and they sailed across the English Channel and landed in England in about 55 BC. Now, they didn't stay long, but the Roman armies that followed them did, and they landed and colonized the island for about 500 years. The time in history is known as the Roman occupation of Britain. That's a bust of Julius Caesar, in case you were wondering. That's kind of what he looked like. That's the man. Now, when the Romans came, they built roads, and this is a mile marker in England. These are some of the Roman roads that are famous throughout the world, built by Roman soldiers and slaves. There's probably 20 or 30,000 miles of this through the UK. They also built forts. They built bathhouses. They built luxury homes. There's even a wall around Scotland here. It was built by another Caesar named Hadrian Caesar. The wall is about 80 miles long. There's a shot of it here. They say you can cross it in about 3 days. Has anyone ever been to England and seen that or walked that before? Have you? It's pretty impressive, isn't it? It's supposed to be 15 feet high, 10 feet wide. It was basically designed to keep the people up above that line out of their territories. Apparently, the people in Scotland didn't like being invaded, so they fought back.
This is 15 feet tall and 10 feet wide?
Yeah.
And then
It's in the ruins right now, but it goes 80 miles across the bottom of Scotland.
Mm.
It's really famous. This is the emperor that...
Sure Trump wasn't there? It's only 80 miles long.
Hadrian Caesar, right there. Okay, now our first artifact is to the south of Hadrian's Wall, up there in a place called Lydney Park. Lydney Park is an area down here, just below London, about 2 hours west of London, and it's an archaeological paradise. The Romans in the 4th century began to mine this area, and they found tin and copper and gold, and they sent all that back to Rome for the war machine. Now, during the excavations in the early 1900s, they found a temple floor. This is the foundation for it. The emperor who was in charge was Theodosius Caesar, and that is his coin. Now, here's a question for you. There are a lot of major important Caesars. Does anyone know who the most important, most famous Caesar of all time is? Anyone know? Who is it? Julius? Augustus? He sells pizzas. That is the most famous Caesar of all time.
Yeah, I'll give you 2 for 1.
Yes, pizza. Oops, sorry, too fast. Now, on this floor, this temple floor, there is an inscription. It's written to a god. It's dedicated to a particular god named Nodens. Now, Nodens was a Celtic god. He was the god of the sea. And the inscription that we're going to see is written in Latin, and it basically says, "To the god Nodens, Titus Flavius Civilis, officer in charge of the supply depot of the fleet, laid this pavement out of money offerings, the work being in the charge of Victorinus, interpreter of the governor's staff." Now, Titus Civilis was the man in charge of the supply depot as the Roman armies brought their goods into their assorted soldiers. It would land in Gloucester County, where this particular place is. The person who actually did the work is a man named Victorinus, and his name is on this art piece. This art piece is in the Roman Museum in Lydney Park, and this is the piece. Now, I want you to look around the corners. First of all, it comes from Genesis Park, which is Garth's website. It's one of the best pictures out there of that particular mosaic. And it's a sea scene. You notice there's fish around it, all in the corners. There's fish in the corner on the left. On the bottom right, there seems to be some kind of a whale. But what are the 2 creatures in the middle? What do those look like to you? Kind of interesting, isn't it? Look a little close up here. They're long-legged, long-bodied. There's a rib cage right there. If you take off the horns, you would find something that we would identify as maybe a creature in a museum. We would know what that looks like. The question is, how did a Roman soldier 1,600 years ago draw something that we recognize as a dinosaur? How would he do that? Where would he get the information for that? We have the information because we've seen hundreds and hundreds of pictures of dinosaurs in our lifetime. We've seen them in movies, on t-shirts, in books, cartoons. We know what they look like because we've seen them. How do they know what that looks like? And why is that something so close to what we would say is a dinosaur, and it's over 1,600 years old? These are soldiers living on an island, Roman army.
Which island?
England.
In England.
England, yeah. All right, now notice something else about this. This is interesting. If you look at the legs are almost sketched in. You notice how according to detail the body is, but look at the front legs. It's almost as if it was an afterthought. The person who was doing this, Victorinus, did not really know what to do with the feet. And that's compelling. Karaoke time. All right, now look also at the bottom of the belly of this one here. Notice it's not going into a tail or into legs, it's curved over. Now the Romans, like most people of antiquity, believed that dragons originally came from the water. Did you know that? All the land animals, land dragons that are in history, generally they believe came from out of the water.
The Romans.
Everybody did. And the question is why? Were they seeing something in the water that they could identify with things on the land? That's the question. And the bigger question is why, if you're going to dedicate a mosaic to a god, the god of the sea, why would you have this particular god with those dragons on the ship? On the mosaic floor? That's the question. How would they know what to draw? Why would they draw that? To me, this kind of a creature, if you have a water scene like this, it would look more something like that. Something you would see in the water. And the question is, of course, did they see something in the water as they went back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean? Now we know the Vikings did. They used to draw or put dragon heads on their ships because they were afraid of things in the water. That's why they call them dragon boats. If you look at the tops of all the boats, they're supposed to scare off things in the water. Now I'm not sure how much we know about the Vikings, but they were not known to be a real timid people. You know, they sailed across 3 continents and burned their way all the way through. They were fearless until they got into the water. They were afraid of things in the water. And it's not just the Vikings, of course. It was the English, it was the South American Indians, the North Americans, it was the Fijians, the Chinese, the Koreans. Every culture that has a shipping industry has these stories of these great reptiles in the sea. Let's go a little further. Now, it's not just in the old days. This is a woodcut from a man named Olaus Magnus. He's an archbishop of one of the larger cities in Europe, 1550. In his day, apparently, there were creatures so large they would snatch crewmen off the ships and drag them down to their death. This is from a copper plate. There's a book by an archbishop now, the Lutheran Church, named Eric Pontippidan. And he has in his book this drawing of a creature that was shot by a captain of a ship in the Swedish Army, or Swedish Navy, I'm sorry. This is kind of the picture of it. Some huge creature. Now, this is the description that the captain gave to our archbishop. He said the head of this snake, they usually called things in the water snakes no matter what they were, because it looked serpentine, looked like some kind of a reptile. This head of the snake, which it held more than 2 feet above the surface of the water, resembled that of a horse. It was of a grayish color, and the mouth was quite black and very large. It had black eyes and a large white mane that hung down from the neck to the surface of the water. Besides the head and neck, we saw 7 or 8 folds or coils of the snake, which were very thick, and as far as we could guess, there was about a fathom's distance, which is about 6 feet between them. Now, this is from Captain Lawrence de Ferry. He is the captain of the ship. Most of the time when sea people have some kind of a sighting, they'll go down in the bar, right? And they'll start talking and drinking, and pretty soon that little sea monster is a huge thing. Well, this captain didn't go to the bar. He went down to court and filed a deposition with 2 of his men saying this is what they saw. He goes on to say that they got close enough to it to take a shot at it, and they hit it in the neck, and it spurted blood. The thing dove underwater, and after a few minutes, there was blood in the water, and that creature never came back up again. Giant reptile in the water. This is a man who's a very famous man in Greenland. His name is Hans Egede. He was so famous, literally, as a missionary, that they named him the Apostle to Greenland. The Swedish government not only has statues of him, but they've got a postage stamp in his honor. He went to the Inuit Indians in Greenland to preach the gospel to them. On his way over, he and his shipmates saw that creature in the water. Huge creature, and this is his description of it. On the 6th of July, 1734, when off the south coast of Greenland, a sea monster appeared to us whose head, when raised, was on level with our main top. The sea monster was as high as the ship. Its snout was long and sharp. It blew water almost like a whale. It had large, broad paws, or fins. Its body was covered with scales, and in other respects, it was as a serpent. And when it dived, its tail, which was raised in the air, appeared to be a whole ship's length from its body. Now, that's quite something for a missionary of the gospel to say as he's sailing down towards Greenland. There are huge things that have been seen in the water, huge reptile-like creatures in the water throughout history. This particular drawing was done by the first mate and the captain of the ship, the SS Sacramento, as they went from New York through the Atlantic down to Australia. Notice it carefully. It's got kind of the head, an alligator-like head. It's got fins there and a very long body. We're going to see that creature again in a dictionary a few years later. This is another eyewitness account, eyewitness drawing of a ship that was attacked by a giant creature. This is the SS British Banner. Now notice this creature was as long as the ship, and it attacked the ship as it was moving through the water. The front of the ship is called a bowsprit. That's where you tie the main line to. The creature attacked that as if it was trying to really wrestle and bring down that vessel. These are all very sober men, very serious men, and they're talking about things they've seen in the water. Finally, in 1880, there was a creature that came into the Jersey Shore, and it created a big fear. It was a huge creature, and what was really unique about it, besides blowing water out of its nostrils, is that it rolled like this. Now, if you've ever seen serpents or sea serpents, they don't swim like this, they swim like this. Serpents on the ground are back and forth, they don't do this. That particular creature was doing like this. A whole different kind of animal in the water. Now, Webster, Noah Webster, you know his 1828 dictionary, he has a creature that they dragged up in a fishing line in 1749. This creature resembled in some degree an alligator, but having two large fins which served for swimming or flying, it had two legs terminating in hoofs like that of an ass. Its body was covered with impenetrable scales, and it had 5 rows of teeth. It looks very much like that kind of a creature. Resembles an alligator. Same area, same Atlantic area along the coast of Europe. In fact, if you look at this and kind of put it up with the fossil record, we would find something very similar to that. That's a mosasaur. Same alligator head, same fins right here. There are the fins. Very long body. The bottom fins would be underwater. It's a very similar creature. This is supposed to be extinct 65 million years. And yet we see something that, if you look at it close enough, it's pretty close to resemblance. Things get pretty big out in the ocean. In fact, not just in the ocean, there's some pretty large things you can find on the beach as well. That's an actual photograph, folks. I think it was a joke. It was a joke photograph. But it seems that this creature was in the water recently. We don't know for sure. We think we found its mate, though. Edna. So this particular slideshow is called Dinosaurs in Ancient Art. And there are so many photographs and so many slides and so many bits of art that it's very hard to put them all together in one presentation. So we're going to kind of narrow it down to Italy, to Israel, and the Middle East. Let me catch up with my slides here. Let's see. Okay, what we're going to do tonight is basically art appreciation. Does everyone know what that is? What is art appreciation? Give me a good example. You can read that one. What's the definition for art appreciation? You're looking at something somebody did, and you try to figure out what they're trying to say, right? You don't need a degree for that. You don't need to be a scientist. You just need to look at that and say, this is what it looks like to me.
Would that be more like art interpretation?
Yeah, that's good too. We can use that as well. Either one. We're going to appreciate the art as we go through. So let me catch up here. Now, I am not a scientist. I actually don't want to be a scientist. I'm not the least bit interested in being a scientist. But I am a Christian, and like you, I'm interested in sort of these things because they reflect on my Bible, on the Word of God. I need to remind you, as we go through this is kind of a fun presentation. We can't prove that any of the things that we see are dinosaurs because we can't talk to any of the people who did them. They're all dead. So we can't ask them what they actually saw. But what we can do is look at it and examine it and try to see for ourselves what it is they're trying to represent. And that's what we're going to do. Let's see. Let me catch up here a little more.
In interpretation, we call it prima facie interpretation. So we really interpret.
Yeah.
So we go to prima facie.
This is like fossils. We're looking at a piece of art, a one-time shot in history, and we're trying to see what it says in the larger picture of the world.
Called prima facie.
Prima facie examination. Very good, sir. So nobody should get mad, right? This is all you just kind of see what it is to you. Now, we're going to see a lot of pictures here, and most of them have been seen already. They're already kind of common, but for some reason, they're really not well known. And perhaps when we get through a lot of them, you'll see why they're not so well known. They seem to show something that goes contrary to the current worldview in our country. So how many of you would say that you know a lot about dinosaurs? Raise your hand. How many know a lot about dinosaurs? Okay, besides Garth. How many of you would say you know a little bit about dinosaurs? Raise your hand. How many of you are not going to raise your hand no matter what question I ask you? Raise your hand. Always one. All right, I'm going to ask you very serious questions about dinosaurs. First question is, what kind of dinosaurs make the best police officers?
Oh my.
Yes, it's true. It would be the Triceratops.
Oh.
Triceratops, true story. What do you say to a 20-ton dinosaur that snatches your bag of Doritos? You're right, yeah. What do you always find in the middle of dinosaurs? The letter S. Dinosaurs, letter S.
I didn't get the other one.
Which one? The bag of Doritos?
Cheese.
That's nacho cheese. That's not your cheese.
Oh, okay.
It's a Dorito joke. What kind of dinosaur keeps you awake all night? It would be the Brontosaurus. Yes, I did go there. I went there. I really did. I'm sorry that I did it, though. Okay, and finally, the most important question of all, what is the difference between a dinosaur and a strawberry? Strawberry is red. Okay? Let me catch up here. And I'm glad you're enjoying it. It gets better. It gets much better, actually. Now, to find out the question we have about dinosaurs in ancient art, we want to ask ourselves, if God made the world at the beginning, we need to start back at the beginning. If there are dinosaurs around today, if these are creatures that have lived with man, do they go back to the book of Genesis? That's the question. And if they do, where do we find them? So we're going to kind of look at this because it's an important thing. Now, I'm a pastor, and it's an important thing because when evolution rose from Darwin's milieu, it became an attack on the book of Genesis. It was that way from the beginning, and it's that way to this day. Let me tell you why. When Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, they asked him a question about marriage, and Jesus said, Matthew 19:4, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And he said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Jesus Christ is quoting Genesis chapter 1 in verse 4 and Genesis chapter 2. He's making a doctrinal statement and a definition about marriage based on a passage in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. If Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are not actual history, this is a nonsense statement. He's basing the idea of marriage on those two events. Further, 2 Corinthians 4 says, for God who commanded the light to shine out of the darkness has shined in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of Jesus, of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. When did God command the light to shine out of the darkness? Day one. If that's not a true statement, then God can't shine the light of Christ in our hearts either, because it's a nonsense statement. It didn't happen. The Old Testament and the New Testament are woven together. The book of Genesis is woven through the New Testament. And we're going to see, if you don't take it seriously, you're going to lose Christianity. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13. For Adam was first formed, then Eve. Well, when was Adam formed?
Day 6.
Genesis 2, right? God got down on his knees literally, not literally, but made him out of the ground. And then he took a rib and formed his wife. That's either a real event or it's not. If it's not a real event, then the Apostle Paul is deceived. He's putting the order of the hierarchy of the sexes based on that principle in Genesis chapter 2.
It's kind of cagey.
Huh?
Cagey.
It gets even more profound because, look at 11:3. I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve, there's now a serpent that he takes seriously. That's Genesis 3. Did the serpent beguile Eve? Well, from Genesis 3, yeah, he did. Now, Genesis 3 is a mythology. This is another nonsense statement. That means that Paul has huge sections of his writing that doesn't make any sense. It's based on fantasy. It's not real. He's fearing that just as the serpent was able to beguile Eve, that somehow Satan, the serpent, will beguile the church. If Eve didn't exist, this means nothing. It's an attack on the Bible. It was from the beginning, the very beginning, and we'll see that a little bit later on in our presentation. Once again, if we bring the serpent back, he shows up again in Revelation 12, verse 7. Michael and his angels fight against the dragon and his angels. Who is the dragon? Well, he's the serpent, that old serpent. That's the same one in the garden. That's who Michael's fighting against. If that serpent doesn't exist, if that was a fantasy story, that doesn't make any sense. Revelation's out the window as well. Remember Abel? Cain killed Abel? Jesus is putting the blood of Abel together with all of the godly men who were murdered by the Jewish people and saying every one of those persons' blood will be required of that generation of people. If Abel was a fantasy, this is another bad statement. There is no blood of Abel. How can they be judged for something that didn't happen? How can they be responsible for continuing the evil that started with Abel if Abel didn't exist? Yeah.
Are you saying that their argumentation is one fantasy?
If you're an evolutionist, you have to assume that man evolved 500,000 years ago, that we evolved up from monkeys, that Adam and Eve are either a mythological story or it's a people group 50,000 years ago. And it wasn't made out of the ground. There wasn't a woman made from his rib. None of that stuff is true if you're an evolutionist. It's an attack on what we have in the Bible. It always has been. We'll see that. I mean, Darwin, if you get a chance, look at some of the quotes of Darwin. Darwin attacked the scriptures from the very beginning. This is all about attacking Genesis. All of this is. We'll get to it in a bit if we can. Book of Jude. Jude's an apostle of Jesus Christ. He's quoting Enoch. Enoch is the seventh man from Adam in Genesis chapter 5. Well, if Enoch doesn't exist either, then Jude is massively wrong on a prophecy that he's producing in his own writing. It puts the scriptures up for grabs. That's why this is a serious event. It's a big, serious thing. Finally, we have Adam. Adam has a number of kids. They have kids who have kids who have kids to Noah. Noah has kids all the way down to Abraham. If Adam is not a real person, there is no bloodline to Jesus. If there's no bloodline to Jesus, we don't have a Messiah. We have a lie. We have a pious fraud. We have to throw out the book of Matthew and the book of Luke because they trace Jesus back to Adam. If Adam is a figment of the imagination or a pious fraud, messianic doctrine goes out the window. Let me show what I mean here. Well, let's get to this last one here first. Jesus, talking about the days of Noah. Now, we all know that evolutionists will reject the days of Noah. They reject the flood of Noah. But Jesus ties in his second coming to the days of Noah. If the days of Noah didn't exist, how do you make sense out of that? He's saying, just like it was in the days of Noah, so it will be when I come back. If the days of Noah were a made-up fraud, Jesus is quoting a fraud to show that he's coming back again in relation to a fraud. It doesn't actually work. It's nonsense. It's a nonsense statement. This is what evolutionists want us to believe. It's kind of a joke. All right, we'll move past. All right. What? All right, does everyone know who that man is there? Who's that man? You can read him a little later on one of those blackboards. Who's that man? Yes, Thomas Huxley. Who's Darwin's bulldog, Garth? He was the right-hand man of Charles Darwin. He was the man that catapulted evolution into the genteel society of England. This is what he says and what they understood at the very beginning of the rise of evolution in England. Let me skip down to the blue. If Abraham, which is the father of us all, is more or less a mythical hero, if the story of the deluge, which is the flood, is a fiction, if the story of the fall is a legend, the fall in the garden is a legend, and that of the creation, the dream of a seer, if all these definite and detailed narratives of apparently real events have no more value as history than the stories of the regal period of Rome, what is to be said about the messianic doctrine? If you can't believe Genesis, how are you going to believe the things that point to Jesus?
So he was the right-hand man of Darwin?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. They call, in fact, he was a lawyer. He was so tenacious that, like Garth said, they called him Darwin's bulldog. H.G. Wells makes a great point. If all animals and man evolved, then there were no first parents, no Adam and Eve, no Eden, no fall of man. And if there had been no fall, then the entire historic fabric of Christianity, the story of the first sin, and the reason for an atonement collapses like a house of cards. There's no fall in the garden. We don't need to be redeemed. We don't need to be forgiven. We don't need someone to die in our place. Michael Roos, another very famous atheist, an outspoken one, makes this point. Either humankind is in a state of original sin coming from our father Adam, or it is not. If it is, then there was a reason for Jesus to die. If it's not, Calvary has as much relevance as a gladiator's death in the Colosseum. Does that make sense? Darwin knew this very well. These are people that follow Darwin.
What side was Michael Roos on?
Which side?
Yeah.
He's on their side. Yeah, he's one of the men that made sure that when we went to court, when the creationists went to court to ask for equal time to sort of challenge evolution, he made sure that we didn't get to do it. He was the star witness against the creationists. You all know Richard Dawkins, right? Very famous atheist today. He's being sarcastic, but look what he says. But of course, the story of Adam and Eve was only ever symbolic, wasn't it? Symbolic. So Jesus had himself tortured and executed in vicarious punishment for a symbolic sin committed by a non-existent individual. There's more. You can actually read a lot of them out there. Here's another good one. This is a very contemporary, very popular evolutionist. Look what he says. Why reject the story of creation in Noah's Ark? Because we know that animals evolved. As an evolutionist, he says this. But nevertheless, accept the reality of the virgin birth and the resurrection of Christ, which are equally at odds with, quote, science. After all, biological research suggests the impossibility of human females reproducing asexually, or of anyone reawakening 3 days after death. There is a war going on. Great. Okay, so what I thought we would do, just real quickly, you're all well aware of these things. I know I'm just sort of, beating the drum a little bit, but let's go over and look at what happened in the creation week. Let's see what we can find as far as dinosaurs and men together. So we'll go real quickly through this if we can. On the first day, what did God make? Light. First day, God saw, said, let there be light, and there was light. So the question is, what did God say after he'd made that first period of morning and evening? Anyone know? What was that? That it was good. What else did he say? He said, hey, let's call it a day. Because it was a day working. Okay, day number 2. God made the firmament. He divided the waters that were on the earth from the waters below. He made the sky in the center, or the thing called the firmament. Day number 2. Evening and morning was the second day. Day number 3, he made the seas and the dry land, let the waters be gathered together, let the earth rise. And then he planted grass and trees and fruit trees on day number 3. Day number 4, what did God make on day number 4? The sun, moon, and stars, right? There were no sun, moon, and stars the day before that, or the first day. But on the 4th day, God made it. Now, let me show you something real quick before we go into that. That is a photograph of the sun. Look in the about 3 o'clock next to the sun. You see what that is? That's Venus. That's Venus crossing the sun right there.
Where was this taken?
I don't know what continent it was, but it's a pretty popular picture. There was an eclipse, and they took that picture. But if you want to just see what God is like, perfect circle. Perfect circle.
Sometime in September or October.
You know, I have it written down, I think. But I can't track it on this. I'm like 5 slides behind on this here. It's you can buy that. That's a pretty beautiful and common. Actually, I don't have that. It's if you go on YouTube and just put Venus crossing the sun, you'll get that shot. It's just spectacular, absolutely spectacular. Our God is awesome. Yeah. He's awesome. Yeah. Okay, now as far as there are a number of people, including Christian people, who have trouble with these concepts. They say that there's no way that we could have light on the first day if God made the sun, moon, and stars on the 4th day. So they think there's some kind of a conflict in there. I myself have never seen that issue, because the scripture says God is light. I mean, God is love. We know that. Look around us. He's absolute love. But he's also light. So is the God who is light, is it hard for him to make light? No. Would he need to have a sun to make the light? No. In fact, in Revelation, look what it says. Revelation 21. He's going to light the city. Look at verse 23. This is New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, prepared as a bride for her husband. I saw no temple, verse 22, therein, for the Lord Almighty, Lord God Almighty, and the Lamb are the temple of it. And the city, that is New Jerusalem, the new heavens and the new earth coming down in New Jerusalem, had no need of the sun, neither of the moon, to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it. God's glory lightens that place. God's glory lit the first 3 days of Genesis. Didn't have to have the sun, moon, and stars. I've never seen that argument. God doesn't need to do those things to make light. So,
And there's no reflection.
we're going to have to wait and see, because I don't know what glory looks like. I mean, if you want to trip a little bit, all right, we see everything in here because of the light rays that are bouncing off our eyes, and the colors absorbing certain things and reflecting other things. This is with just normal electrical light. What happens when we see God's spiritual light, his spiritual glory reflecting on things? What are we going to see?
No shadow.
We don't have any idea what depth or dimension or things that are available that he knows about, that when he shows us, we're going to open our eyes up for the first time. It's going to be off the charts. And when this place is beautiful, I mean, go outside tomorrow and look at the beauty that the sun shows us. I mean, squirrels and, all that wonderful stuff, raccoons. Imagine when God's light shines everything and reflects everything. We see everything through his eyes. It's going to be outstanding. So moving along, we have marine life and the birds of the air in day number 5. Now, we saw creatures a little earlier that were told to us by eyewitnesses, drawn by eyewitnesses, that say they saw them in the water. If God made all the marine life, all the things that swim in the water on day number 5, would he have made those creatures on that day? Yes or no? If he's dividing it up between 5 days, he makes light and dark. The second day, he makes the sky. The third day, he makes the dry land and the plant life. The fourth day, the sun, moon, and stars. And the fifth day, he makes marine life and the birds. Would those creatures in the water have been made the same day as the other creatures in the water? The answer is, according to God, God's word, it would be yes. It would be yes. The kind of creatures that Garp is hunting down, that fly in the air, that came out of the water as well, would they have been made on the fifth day? Yeah. Whatever creatures they're trying to find were made the same day he made sparrows and hawks, robins. What did God make on the sixth day? We know this very well. He made, look at verse 25, the beasts of the earth after his kind, cattle after their kind, everything that creeps upon the earth. Behold, God saw everything he had made, and it was very good. The evening and the morning on the sixth day. On the sixth day, God made all land animals and all insects, things that creep on the ground and the beasts of the earth. Would that include all land animals, according to God?
Yes.
Right? Big ones, small ones, things that are around now. What about things that are extinct now? Would that have included that in the day of creation? Yeah. Yeah. Let's see where I am here in my slides. Hold on. Okay. So on the sixth day, God made everything on the land, everything that lives on the land. So the question is, what kind of an animal is a dinosaur? Well, not an honest politician. They may almost be extinct, but they're not dinosaurs. What is a dinosaur? Which kind of animal is that?
Reptilian?
It's a reptile, right? Dinosaurs are reptiles. Okay, now, you all know this, I'm sure. Dinosaur, the word dinosaur is a Greek word. It simply means terrible lizard. And it was coined in 1842. It's not a very old word. Dino means terrible, and the saur is a lizard. So if you look at all the kinds of dinosaurs we have, Tyrannosaurus, Spinosaurus, Stegosaurus, Corythosaurus, Seismosaurus. Dinosaurs are reptiles.
Defined right when he was doing his research, and he was coined by.
They found some, yeah, they didn't know what it was, but they coined it when they were digging up fossils for the first time. Now, we kind of know what these are because, like I said before, we've all seen them thousands of times. We're going to find people in art that didn't dig them up, didn't re-articulate them, didn't put flesh on them, but they still drew them. Now, if there are these kinds of creatures, and we call them dinosaurs, would they have been in the Bible? Would they have been made the same day as we said before, on day 5 and 6? The answer is yes. What would the Bible have called them? If it wasn't dinosaurs, I mean, I read a King James, 1611. This word was coined in 1842, so I'm not going to see the word dinosaur in my Bible. What kind of words would God have used? Yeah, things like that. And we have those in there.
Job.
Okay, yeah, exactly. There's some really neat stuff in Job, but we're not going to look at it today. Okay, the question, do dinosaurs live on land or in the water? No. Dinosaurs lived on land.
That says reptiles.
I'm out. My bad. I'll get to that in a minute. Where do reptiles live? On land or in the water? Reptiles live on land. They may lay their eggs in the water, but generally reptiles live on land. Amphibians live in water and land. But a reptile lives on land. Okay? And did dinosaurs, think of a T-Rex, think of a Brontosaurus, think of a Stegosaurus, think of the raptors, did they live on land or in the water? On land, right? And dinosaurs, according to Genesis, are land animals. So there's a dinosaur.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry about that. Get rid of him quickly. We all feel better, don't we? Okay, let me catch up here again. All right, what else did God make on day number 6? We're going to close up our little trip through Genesis. What else did God make on day number 6?
Man and woman.
Exactly. We know that God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female, created he them. Now, it just so happens that we have an actual photograph of Adam and Eve, believe it or not. I'm not kidding you. We have a photograph of Adam and Eve.
Oh,
They're from Chula Vista. I went backwards? What happened there? What? Did we get past that? There they are. There they are. That's Adam and Eve. You want to know what they look like? That's them, right there. Adam and Eve. So the answer is, if God made Adam and Eve on the sixth day, he made all the land animals on the sixth day, and dinosaurs are land animals. That means God made Adam and dinosaurs on the same day. That's what Genesis says. So at some level, we have always lived with these kinds of creatures. Biblically, anyways. Just to put a point to it, the fourth commandment, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work. Thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, maidservant, cattle, or the stranger that is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. 6 days. The 6 days of creation, God made everything that exists, even things that are extinct now. And then he rested on the Sabbath day. Now, this is part of the 10 Commandments. This is the stuff God wrote with his finger on a rock. This is God's own work there. He made everything in 6 days. Okay. Now, if this is true, if God did make man and dinosaurs together, what kind of evidence should we be looking for? What would be reasonable to find if this is true in history? Well, we would tend to see descriptions of dinosaurs in legends, maybe eyewitness sightings, and stories, like Garth was talking about Grendel. You'd find these large reptiles working in the background of stories. They wouldn't be always singled out because they were part of nature. And as time went on, and we know from the degradation of the planet, they've become more and more rare. You know, we have, I believe the last count I saw was that there was something like 200 species going extinct every year. They just go out of existence. A lot of those great creatures would have gone out of existence for a number of reasons. You'd also tend to find dinosaur figures in ancient artwork. That's reasonable. If you have art, you're going to have creatures that occasionally cross your boundaries, you're going to put them in it. And also, possibly, some of them still alive today. It makes sense for us as Christians to believe that because we have a 6,000 to 10,000 year old earth. It makes no sense if you're an evolutionist. And they have to cover up these things that people talk about because it won't fit. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but Mark Armitage is a great example of how evolutionists are shutting down reality. He's finding dinosaur soft tissue in dinosaur bones. Dinosaur soft tissue is like a piece of steak. A piece of steak is not going to last 10,000 years. It's not going to last 1,000,000 years. It's certainly never going to last 65 million years. Throw a piece of hamburger outside. How long does it last? This is not rocket science. There's a kind of a cover-up. The evidence that's out there is being suppressed. And thank God, Mark won. He's like what did he tell us? He's the first win we've had in a really, really long time. The evolutionists run society. They run science. It's their ball game now. They came into it sneakily, but they have it now. They own the education. They own the media, they own the courts, they own the science associations, and they have the power of the ACLU and others to shut down anybody that makes a formidable attempt against their views. And we're going to look a little bit later. Darwin himself showed that there wasn't any evidence for his theory. We can get there shortly. We can maybe see it. Okay, let me kind of tie this together really quick. This is a believer in Christ, but he's struggling with evolution. It's apparent that the most straightforward understanding of the Genesis record is that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 solar days, that man was created on the 6th day, and that the death and chaos entered the world after the fall of Adam and Eve. The issue is the most straightforward understanding is without regard to the hermeneutical considerations suggested by evolutionary science. The only reason there's an issue is because people are trying to wed Genesis with evolution. That's why there's a problem. Dr. John Klotz, it's hardly conceivable that anyone would question the interpretation of these days of the scripture that you have in your Bible, your first 10 chapters of Genesis, were it not for the fact that people are trying to wed these two things together, and there's no need to. Darwin is an anti-Christian. He was a godless man who tried to form a system without God in it and give a scenario of how it happened. He doesn't have any evidence for it, and to this day, there isn't any evidence for it, and yet it's the narrative against God that's winning in our country. It's winning. Louis Jacobs, now we're going to get to what we're going to look at here with the co-occurrence of men and dinosaurs. If there's evidence for that, this is what Louis Jacobs says. The co-occurrence of men and dinosaurs, such an association would dispel an earth with vast antiquity. The entire history of creation, including the day of rest, could be accommodated in the 7 biblical days of the Genesis myth. If you could prove that dinosaurs and men lived together, evolution would be vanquished. That's an evolutionist saying that. Very famous evolutionist, by the way. Now, let me get just slightly off track. Louis Jacobs is a professor at SMU. SMU is Southern Methodist University. That's John Wesley University. I wonder what John Wesley would say if he knew that an atheist is running whole sections of a university that was proclaiming the book of Genesis and the Savior throughout the Methodist history. What would he say, knowing that they had allowed atheists to run rampant in his university? It's not just Wesley, it's Yale, Harvard. There was an event at Southern Christian University.
They actually did this?
That's 2008. That's the family weekend.
Oh, wow.
John MacArthur said that out of 105 Christian universities, there's like 5 that honor Genesis. The other ones are all compromised and are all over the place.
Gosh.
Yeah. Now, let's do a test. See how much we've all been brainwashed here, okay?
Yes.
All right. Here's the question. The Lord created many different kinds of animals during the creation week, right? Lots of different kinds of animals. Can you think of any that still exist today? Give me one.
The birds.
Oh, phooey. Yeah, of course, man, everything. That's the grumpiest cat in the world. Not happy getting his picture taken. Everything that exists today, God made in that time. You guys are very bright. That's because you're a creation science group, though. A lot of people go, alligators? Worms? It's like, no, everything. Everything we have today was made that day, including things that are extinct now. So, okay, I did tell Garth that I was going to do like an hour. So I have to take a break here, I think. And then if you need to go home, please feel free.
Yes.
The break's over, let's go.
Does anybody, if you have to go home? Well, actually, okay.
We're ready.
Hold on, we need to have the... Okay, break's over. Okay, so you can return to your seats now.
Hey, Mr. Atheist, what's going on?
Hey, stupid God believer, you're stupid.
Gee, you sure are grumpy, and you sound just like Patrick from SpongeBob.
Whatever.
So, Mr. Atheist, I'd like to know what you think about the supernatural.
There's no such thing as the supernatural, just like there's no such thing as God. Just like there's no such thing as the flying spaghetti monster.
Oh, I see. Well, let me ask you this. Do you believe in the principle of cause and effect?
You mean the rule that says something cannot come from nothing, and every effect must have a cause? Yeah, of course, you moron. And that's why I don't believe in your stupid God. because your God would totally break that rule, idiot.
How about the Big Bang Theory? You agree with that?
Duh, of course. That's how the universe started. A big explosion of matter and energy. It wasn't some supernatural force, creationist moron.
Okay, Mr. Atheist. If you agree that something can't come from nothing, then who or what caused the Big Bang? In other words, where did the original matter and energy come from that started the Big Bang?
You idiot. The universe is a constant. It's just always been there.
Well, if you're right, that means the universe defies the law of cause and effect, doesn't it? And that would make the existence of our universe supernatural, which means we both believe in a supernatural cause for our existence.
Well, you idiot. The universe just kind of started on its own. The Big Bang was how the universe created itself.
How would the universe create itself? That would also break the law of cause and effect. You just said that was a big reason you don't believe in God. So then, shouldn't you stop believing in our universe?
Well, haven't you heard of virtual particles? Scientists have found particles that might come into existence from literally nothing. So maybe something can come from nothing.
Well, if you're right, doesn't that make God scientifically possible?
Well, I've heard some really smart atheists talk about other dimensions of time, or an eternally oscillating universe. Stuff like that might explain a universe without a first cause.
Wow. Well, can those things be observed scientifically?
No.
Isn't that one of your biggest complaints about God?
Yeah. Never mind. I've decided I don't totally agree with the law of cause and effect, okay?
Okay. That means you can no longer use that law to argue against God.
That's pretty good. Okay.
That's really good.
Works pretty good. Okay. So we're going to do. Get ready.
Frighten.
Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
Yes.
Okay, let's go to Israel. First artifact we have in Israel is a few miles outside of Nazareth in a place called Sepphoris. Here is an archaeological dig in Sepphoris. This is I believe it's the University of Florida and Israel's Hebrew University. They were digging, and when they dug, they found a house down below, and in that house, they found that right there, the Nile Festival House. It's a 5th century house. Now, I want you to look at this. It's another mosaic right there. It's a bird trapping scene. You can see there's a duck, there's like a turkey, there's a ostrich over there. They're trying to catch it with nets. This man has a spear and he's trying to kill the ostrich. And then you got that guy right there with a rock trying to kill that thing right there. Now, it kind of looks like in this scene that they're trapping these birds and something came up in the middle of the hunt and they're trying to kill it. The question is, what is that creature right there? What is that? Kind of a large reptile. It's not really an alligator because it has horns or ears on top. A giant reptile coming in during a bird hunting scene. Now, if you take off, for fun, if you take off the ears or the horns, you have what you would pretty much see in the museum. Giant reptile. Some kind of, not a theodont, but a sauropod, dinosaur. Coming in, interacting 15 centuries ago for the Romans in Jerusalem. A little farther. Now note too something, I've looked into this. Can you tell what kind of ears a creature has by its skull? Do we know that all the dinosaurs were just sort of non-fleshly ear creatures? Do we know that for sure? No, because you can't. What kind of ears does that have? Does anyone have any clue from that? No, that's a Great Dane. It's possible that some of the varieties of animals that God made would have sort of those flourishes on it. We don't know. It's kind of neat that it's got a brindle coat to it. It's got different coloring to it. Like it's not just a gray color, but it's brown and black and red. It's very interesting kind of artwork. Also in Jerusalem, there's a very famous church father. His name is St. John Damascene, very, very famous man. He wrote a treatise that was translated a few years ago. And this is what he says. He's writing this to his flock. And he says, very, very seriously, I'm not telling you, after all, that there are no dragons. Dragons exist, but they are serpents, or, as we know, reptiles. They're born of other serpents. They're not magical. Dragons lay eggs, and there are other dragons. When just born and young, they are small, but when they grow up and mature, they become big and fat, so that they exceed the other serpents in length and size. It is said they grow up more than 30 cubits, which is 45 feet. There are dragons in his day that the people knew about, that he was writing to them in his letters to his flock, explaining what they were. This dragon is a type of beast. It's not a mythological animal. It's not something dropped down from the sky. It's an animal, like the rest of the animals. And it's kind of interesting because it has a goat-like beard and a horn at the back of its head. Now, I know that Garth has a lot of information about some of the pterosaurs that have a horn in the back of the head. Well, this particular dragon also, this kind of dragon, this species of dragon, had that as well. Its eyes are large and gold-colored. These dragons can be either big or small. All serpent kinds are poisonous except dragons. They do not emit poison. Quite something for a revered church father to say, don't you think? This is the traveling of a man. Let me get my slide here. He has this written out in a book called The Traveler from Jerusalem. His name was Father Angelicus Myler. He's a stranger in Jerusalem. And in his travels through Turkey, he noted that there was a Turkish hyena and a Turkish dragon that flies. Another very serious man who's doing archaeological research, doing biological research, and noting that in this part of the world there are these kinds of dragons that fly. Very interesting to come across in history. There are interesting things like that. If we move a little bit to the east and go to Rome, that's a Roman parking ticket, in case you didn't know.
Yes.
True story. How many have heard of Pompeii? Right? What happened in Pompeii? Big explosion, right? The last explosion, believe it or not, was during World War II. There's some of the lava down there. Well, back in 90 AD, or 70, I think it was 90 AD, there was a huge volcanic ash eruption, and it buried the entire city, something like 60 feet deep. And as the archaeologists went through and began to dig into the ash to uncover the city, they found these really strange shapes in the ash. So they decided to pour in plaster of Paris and fill in those shapes to see what they had, and then dig around them as they went down below the ash. And these are the creatures, the people that were trapped in there in that giant conflagration, and this is their last mortal poses as they died. They're all gone. The bodies have disintegrated, but that's how they died when they were covered with ash. It's a very, very powerful place. Anyways, as they dug around, they found this particular fresco. Does everyone know what a fresco is?
No.
A fresco, not a fresca, that's a fresca.
Right.
A fresco is you get a, what's that?
Colored plaster.
Exactly, you get a piece like this. The Sistine Chapel is made out of that. Put a piece of plaster on a wall, and then you paint the plaster. That's a fresco. That's a fresca.
Yes.
Not the same thing. Interestingly, that is a fresca house made out of fresca bottles.
Yes.
I have no idea why you need to know that, but I just thought it was important.
That's good.
Guess where that house is?
Fresca, England.
Arcola, Illinois. Yes, it had to be. Okay, let's get back to our fresco here. This is the house of the physician. It's about 5th century or 1st century AD. We know this had to be done before the volcano hit, so it's at least 2,000 years old. This is a Nile scene. Now, question is, what's that creature right there? Let's take a look at it. This is a hunting scene. Now, the Romans liked the Nile River. The Nile River, because they had a lot of land around Egypt, they were very interested in the natural resources and the Nile River delta. This is a scene that someone drew on the fresco. And you have a guy there that looks, there's a creature here. No one's quite sure what that is yet. It was thought to be a hippo, but it's not really a very good hippo. It's actually a bad hippo. So it might be some other kind of creature that's now extinct that was in the Nile River. The question is, what is that thing? Why is there a guy writing something like that? That's 2,000 years old. What is that? Now, somebody might say, well, that's an alligator. Well, if that's an alligator, then what's that right there? They're not both alligators. They're both different creatures. In fact, now the Romans usually in their Nile scenes did miniature people. So that's supposed to be a full-grown man and in relation to a creature that just apparently came out of the jungle and he's trying to kill. Interesting. It's kind of what you would expect to see if there were these kinds of creatures in history. You would tend to see these pop up. Now, for this creature here, I'm of the opinion it's something like a Dimetrodon to me. It looks like that. I think that's kind of like a sail back there. And if you look carefully, the man riding it had cut into the sail. So it's now got a saddle. And they're moving it along. He's actually riding this thing in the Nile River. Very interesting. Again, quick question. How would they know that that would look so much like what we find in fossils and in the museums today? Why would they have that particular creature we can identify? Good question.
So this Dimetrodon,
Yeah.
like the scales,
It might be a runt. It could be a different species. They could have trimmed it. To me, it looks like that kind of a dinosaur with a sail fin in the back. It may have been a variation of it, but that's kind of what it looks like to me. You know? None of the dinosaur art that we see is perfect. Just like, I mean, if any of you, who's an artist in here? Anybody a really good artist? Oh, okay. How many are not artists here? If you tried to draw something like that, how good would you be? You'd get generalized at it. You'd get pretty good, but not perfect. We're not talking perfect. This is just a fresco somebody painted and put on a wall in Pompeii.
It's not necessarily the painting. They put the fresco, it's living plaster, and then so they put the plaster on in place of, so it would be like a palette knife, what we call a palette knife. Make that fresco.
Okay, now, the Dimetrodon comes, so they say, from the era of the Mesozoic period, the Mesozoic era, I should say. Now, under the Permian period, this is where they would say that creature comes from. And yet, to me, it looks kind of like that type of a creature 2,000 years ago. Now, people get kind of freaked out when you say the word Mesozoic and Jurassic. It's like, yeah, what are you talking about, dude? It's all Latin, come on. Well, it's not that complicated. If you look at the actual periods, you got like let's take the Permian period. Do you know why they call the Permian period? Because there's a rock layer found near Perm, Russia. That's it. The Triassic, there were 3 layers in a particular mountain range, and they found 3 different kinds of dinosaurs. They call it the Triassic era, or period, I'm sorry. The Jurassic is from the Jura Mountains. They found certain skeletons in the Jurassic part of the Jura Mountains of Europe. Not complicated at all. Do you know what you get when you cross a Tyrannosaurus and a pig? Anyone know? Jurassic pork. Yes, I did. Okay, Cretaceous. That's not kosher? That's not kosher. All right, now what's Creta? Well, Creta means chalk. That's the Cretaceous period. If you look at the cliffs of Dover, that's all chalk. They find certain kinds of creatures buried in the chalk. That's all it is. So if they say we found something in the Jurassic, all it means is there's an area, a certain layer in the ground where you found a dinosaur that they're calling the Jurassic period. Just where you're at in the ground and what kind of ground you're in. That's all it is. In fact, everyone knows that you can use a Greek or Latin sounding phrase and sound really, really smart.
Yes.
All right, so this looks like really smart stuff, right? Utinum, barbaris, patium, proprium, tuum infinite. Do you know what that actually says?
No. Yeah.
Placere non configere mea calciamenta ad aria. Virago tuni, tuna casserole, my favorite. I think Elvis is still alive. And I think you are very annoying. You can say anything in Latin and it sounds really profound. So don't get weirded out when people throw these kinds of words around in these debates, because they're not that big a deal.
Please don't nail my sandals though.
Yeah, that's a good one. You should keep that one. Be good for a good conversation. Okay, we're going to stay in Pompeii. This is one of their gods, Neptune. He's the god of the sea. Look at that creature to the left that he's leaning on. This is kind of a sea creature. He's the god of the sea. He's reclining on a sea creature. There's the curve of its neck. Now look at it from here. Look at those fins. 4 fins. Long neck. What kind of creature does that remind you of? Plesiosaur, right? 4 fins, long neck. We'll see a few of those in a minute here. Yeah, they did, actually. They did. Of course, he's got soulless eyes, though. There's just nothing in those eyes. So, interesting. Huh?
He's stoned.
You know, can I steal that from you? That's not bad. What is that creature, and why is that there 2,000 BC, or 2,000 years ago in 90 AD? What's that doing there? Why would they draw something that we could recognize as a 4-fin creature in the fossil record? How would they know that? How do they know it? This is from Calabria, Italy. This one's really cool. They found, I think it was the 70s or 80s, there was a huge rainstorm in a certain small town. And it uncovered and slid an entire side of a hillside down. And they found these kind of artifacts in there, and they're pre-Roman. They were there before the Romans showed up. And what they found along with it are these right here. Terracotta figures. Now this one is the same. It looks like this thing is moving, and it's giving the impression of it's moving like that. But that's a child's toy. That's a kid's toy. That's a little truck. In 2,000 years ago. Now, if you're not convinced that you're where you should be, you are there. Yes, it's the Twilight Zone if you're an evolutionist. Okay, moving along quicker now. This is, again, in Italy. We're going to go to Palestrina. This is the Temple of Fortune. This is a Roman temple that was uncovered during World War II. The Allies were bombing the city. The Italians were fighting back, and they uncovered this whole area here. And we're going to look inside this temple. This is one of the most famous mosaic in the world. It's huge. It's like the size of this wall. And it was done by a man named Demetrius. He was a topographer. And he actually was giving the details of the land along the Nile River in a big picture event. Now, we're going to focus on this part here. Does everyone know, we talked a little bit earlier about the Nile River. The Nile River goes north. Do y'all know that? We're above the equator, so the rivers go south, they go downhill. If you're down below the equator, they kind of go uphill. So these two rivers meet here in the Sudan, and they're what produced the Nile River in Egypt. And all the silt and all the green comes from those two rivers there as they go up towards Egypt. Now, this is the creature we're going to look at here. It's called a Crocodilo pardalis. Now, this is what you would call a chimera. A chimera is like a mix of different animals because the person drawing it doesn't know what to draw. But its name is crocodile leopard. It's one of my favorite ones of all. It's a creature that's living in the rock, and there are African warriors looking to kill it, running after it, trying to kill it. It's a crocodile leopard. Now, what is a crocodile leopard? What would your crocodile leopard represent? What's a leopard? Fast, very fast. And what does a crocodile have? Big, nasty, ferocious teeth. You got a creature that runs really fast and has big, nasty teeth that can shred you. They don't know how to explain it all. In fact, we don't know if Demetrius actually saw it or if it was part of the history of the area, or if people had come up and said, dude, you got to draw this. We got a creature up here that runs like a leopard, and it's got teeth like a crocodile. And he named it the Crocodilo pardalis, the crocodile leopard. This is again on Garth's site, Genesis Park. They've got a lot of great slides, a lot of great pictures, artifacts on his website. You really want to check it out if you're interested in this kind of stuff.
Is that writing, or is that on the...
Right here? Yeah, this is Greek.
Oh, it was on
Croco?
on the...
Yeah, it's on it, yeah. It's put into the mosaic. They actually took the time to do that. And let's give Demetrius his due. It's not easy putting little tiny rocks together to make that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That took a long time. That is one of the great wonders of the ancient art world. It's one of 7 or 8 huge mosaics. And there is some kind of creature on a rock ledge by the water that people look like they're trying to kill. Let's go off further. Crocodilo pardalis. If we go over a little bit to Egypt, we will find. Now, I'm not sure what that is. That thing washed up in, I believe, 1947 after a huge storm. No one quite knows what it is. The scientists couldn't identify it, but it's something that's out there in this incredibly big ocean, incredibly deep ocean that we know almost nothing about. That thing was washed up on the beach, and all they could do is go, we don't know what that is. Big tusks. It's got a...
No eyes.
Huh?
No eyes.
Yeah, it's got a scar, though, on the left. I think the eyes are back there. If you look right over there. Right there. But that looks like it was cut with something. You know, it's God's world. It's a really big world. He made lots of things we know nothing about. We are not that smart. There's a whole world underwater we know almost nothing about. So moving down through Egypt, this is from the British Museum. It is in Egypt, or it was. I'm not sure if it's still there now. Kind of normal creatures. There's a snake right there. And what's that right there, though? What is that? Whoops, too fast. What is that? What kind of creature has 4 fins or legs and a long neck? Not a duck. Ducks don't have 4 feet. They have 2 feet. Not a swan, not a bird. What is it? Not a turtle. Maybe it's that. The Copts are people right now being persecuted by ISIS and other people, especially in Egypt. They are our brothers in Christ. They are being persecuted now. They are the Coptic Christians. This is from a 10th century artifact. Those are stylized elephants over there. And what's that? What is that? Large green creature in the Nile River. What is that? Something you'd see in art. Okay, now we're getting where Garth is now. This is Garth's area. In Egypt, there are winged serpents. There's lots of records of those. Herodotus wrote this, talking about the winged serpents he saw in an area of Arabia. This is Buto, where he found it. This is the area under excavation now. They found winged serpents and their bones. Cicero, very famous historian, talking about the Egyptians. For the much ridiculed Egyptians never deified an animal except the reference to some benefit which they derived from it. For instance, the ibis, being a tall bird with legs that do not bend and a long beak of horn, destroys a vast number of serpents in killing and eating the winged snakes, flying snakes, that are brought in by the southwest wind from the Libyan desert. It preserves Egypt from plague, the snakes being thus prevented from causing harm by their bite when they're living or by their smell when they're dead. Interesting thing for a Roman historian to talk about. Josephus also mentions these flying serpents. This is sort of a legend. Garth has brought this up a number of times. Moses invented a wonderful stratagem to preserve the army safe, where he made baskets and filled them with ibis, those birds, Which animal is the greatest enemy to serpents imaginable? For they fly from them when they come near them, and as they fly, they are caught by the birds and devoured. Another reference to these flying serpents. Look what Scripture says about flying serpents. The burden of the beasts of the south into the land of trouble and anguish, from whence come the young and old lion, the viper and the fiery flying serpent. There's actually a creature, just recent history, that flies. A serpent, some kind of a reptile that flies. Here's a picture of them in archaeology. And there's winged serpents, kind of stylized. That's the ibis bird. There's another winged serpent down there. Now, what's interesting is that these flying serpents, we have no idea what they look like. We know that there are bones. We know people have seen them. We know that kind of bird kills them. Even on the throat of King Tut, you have a winged serpent. There's his crown, there's his head, there's his wings. Interesting to put on the most famous king of antiquity, a winged serpent on his throne. There is even some serpents that have 4 legs. Imagine seeing a 4-legged flying serpent. What is that? What kind of creature is that? Now, Garth, you've done something on the wasp scepter, right? Garth is of the opinion, I follow his view, that these are very likely pterosaur-like creatures. If you look at the face right there, it's a very sharp beak, and then they've got the spike in the back, like that protruding bone in a pterosaur. They're a symbol of the kingship. They're a symbol of Egypt's royalty. They're all over the place. They don't fit any other animal that we can think of. They're not elk. They're not antelope. They're a creature by themselves, and yet they're all through Egyptian archaeology. All over it. They look like that kind of a creature. Now, we're not going to do America today because that's a couple slideshows away. But in Colorado, this particular storm stick that the Indians used is a representative of the thunderbird. Same kind of creature, long bony back head, very sharp beak. American Indians saw that as a symbol of the Great Spirit. Okay. Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry about that. Did I do that?
Go ahead.
All right. Oh, hold on here. Now, this is for Garth. This is specifically for Garth. I'm sorry, Garth, but we have actually found we got a video, an actual video of a pterosaur. I dug it up on the internet. How do I get back? Everybody close your eyes for a second.
Oh.
I don't want you to ruin this yet. I got to get back to that. Okay. This is an actual photograph it's a video from the early days of a real pterosaur. Look at that. Maple White was right. There you go. That's a joke. Okay, so let's draw our things together here. Okay, we're looking at dinosaurs in ancient art, and the question is, if what we saw at the beginning is that the evolutionary attack is on the book of Genesis, it makes sense, because there's really nothing new under the sun. The same Satan who argued with Eve and has done his worst in the world today has made a full-out assault on the book of Genesis. Nothing new about it. It's not even strange. Let me give you a couple of quotes from some of the people who knew Darwin when he first wrote his thesis. Okay, this is his, I'm sorry. I was talking to Nancy earlier about some of the things that Darwin said. Darwin, from the very beginning, understood that his his system was an anti-God system. He tried to couch it as science. The problem was there was never any information that provided evidence for it. It was only his speculation. This is his geology teacher after he wrote his book. This is what he said.
This is the geology.
This is
teacher.
Darwin's geology teacher. Yeah. After he published The Origin of Species. He said, I read your book with more pain than pleasure. Parts of it I admired greatly. Parts of it I laughed at till my sides were almost sore. Other parts I read with absolute sorrow because I think them utterly false and grievously mischievous. This is his geology professor.
He went to a seminary, so he went to a seminary,
Yeah.
and that's what you have to think about.
Yeah, we don't have time for this one, but then maybe the next one we do, we'll take a real critique on Darwin. Because he's
Wow.
Anyways, look what he says about Darwin's assumptions. Many of your wide assumptions are based on, many of your wide conclusions about the origin of species and these transmutations from one species to another are based upon assumptions which can't be proved or disproved. There's no evidence for it. You can't do anything with it. They're simply speculation. Then he asks, why do you express them in the language of induction? As if it's science. Why are you expressing it as if you're proving something scientifically? You're not. There's no evidence that we evolved from one thing to another. This is one of the, I'm having trouble with this. This is William Dawson, a very famous man about the same time as Darwin. There we go. This is their view at the time, as Darwin wrote his book. He says evolutionism is one of the strangest phenomena of humanity. There's not a single shadow of proof. It's supported, evolution theory is supported by vague analogies and figures of speech. Now, no one pretends that they rest on facts actually observed, for no one has ever observed the production of even one species from another. And he goes on to say, let the reader take up either of Darwin's great books or Spencer's biology and merely ask himself as he reads, what's that? Merely ask himself as he reads each paragraph, what is assumed and what is proven? And he'll find the whole fabric of evolution melt away. It's all assumed, nothing's proven. We thus see that evolution as a hypothesis has no basis in experience or in scientific fact, and that it's an imagined series of transmutations that has breaks in it which cannot be filled. Okay, that's working that way, right? Francis Schaeffer. Sorry about that. Abraham Kuyper, a very, very famous man, famous Christian in the turn of the century. He was very, very aware of what was happening in the country and in Europe while evolution was rising. And I've cut, he's got a long article he wrote, and I've cut it into 3 or 4 pieces. This is one of the pieces here. He says, from our viewpoint as Christians now, seeing the rise of this unprovable scientific theory, both the ignoring of evolution and the wanton acceptance of it is naive and short-sighted. Preachers, as well as authors, who wrongly imagine themselves as gaining scientific approval by mixing the dose of evolution with their Christian profession, both in preaching and writing, indict themselves most strongly. In the view of the expert, unpardonable naivete or characterless cowardice. There was a war going on from the very beginning. There's a war going on today about the Genesis. And evolution is the attack. And they've won huge sections of our freedom.
Yeah.
You know, we can do a whole series on the relationship between the ills we have in our society and the direct acceptance of evolution. You can just trace it straight down. It's preposterous.
Crazy.
Yeah, so let me leave you with this thing here. Here we go. There's something to think about here, right? We're at a creation science meeting tonight. We're all interested in science. We like the fact that God has designed the world in a way that's understandable His experiments are repeatable. When we witness to people, a lot of times we kind of get all caught up in trying to prove this particular point or that particular point. And what a scientist said, this is a Christian from the U.S. Academy of Sciences, he said this. Something to think about. In our daily life, as we witness to people, as we talk to people about the Lord, it says that some non-scientist Christians, when they meet a scientist, will call on to debate evolution. That is definitely not the right thing to do. If you knew what problems scientists have in their lives, just like us, pride, ambition, jealousy, fear, that's the kind of thing that Jesus came to do, to resolve by his death on the cross. The evolutionists are not necessarily needing a fight. What they need is Jesus. The gospel is the same for scientists as it is for anyone. Evolution is basically a red herring. If scientists are looking for meaning in their lives, it won't be found in evolution. What he's saying is that if you run across an evolutionist, don't just start looking to try to prove evolution wrong. Look for them as a person. There's a person behind that needs Jesus Christ. As a person who's guilty of sin. They've offended God Most High, and they're going to be held accountable. And they've got the feeling in their heart. They know there's going to be a day of judgment. Those are the people we're talking to. That person behind all the noise of evolution. So it's good to know what we know. It's good to study it. It's good to have answers. But when it comes down to it, let's look for the witness rather than the winning of the argument. Amen?